Hi, and thanks for clicking onto my channel. The following stories are from the subreddit Let's Not Meet. If you have any stories which you would like me to narrate, feel free to send them into my Gmail account at abnormalencounters@gmail.com, or just private message me on YouTube. That's how it works. There's also a link in the description. Thank you and enjoy. This story isn't overly scary, but certainly made me feel frightened at the time. I used to work at Target in Melbourne back in 2003 when I was 18. I'm not what you call an average female. I'm 6'2", lots of tattoos, and not hard to miss if you were to come to the checkout. A quick layout of the store. It was 3 levels, including the basement level where the DVDs were, and where I used to work a few shifts. The majority of the time, though, I was spent working at the checkouts. One shift, an older man with grey hair and glasses came to the checkouts. First thing I noticed is he didn't have any products to buy. He says, "Wow, you remind me so much of my granddaughter." Thomas, right? I smiled and joked about how she must be a great girl. He then began to ask me about my family and where I grew up, etc. Being from Adelaide, I knew I probably didn't know this man. It was weird but not unsettling. Thankfully, there were customers behind him, and I politely said I need to get back to work. He smiled and said he might bring me in some photos one day to show me. I smiled and he left. I didn't think about the encounter at all after that until 2 weeks later, he was back. I wasn't worried, but just annoyed, being 18 and not interested. He showed me photos of his granddaughter and family, and there was a slight resemblance. Again, being a busy store, I had a lot of work to do and excused myself to get back to work. He stood in the store staring at me for a long while, which I noticed, and this was making me uncomfortable. My biggest mistake was not letting my supervisor know at the time. I didn't really tell anyone except for a friend who asked who he was. Skip to 3 weeks later and, yep, you guessed it, there he was. But this time, he looked sad. He managed to get me aside as I was walking to my break. The photos he showed me were of a funeral. First of all, who the fuck takes photos at a funeral? Anyway, he said that his daughter and granddaughter were murdered by his son-in-law and he missed them very much. I kind of felt sorry for him, but then he said something that sent shivers up my spine. "I know that you're my granddaughter. I'm so happy to have found you again." What the actual fuck? My face went red as it does when I get nervous. "I don't think so, sir. I've missed you so much." He began to cry and grabbed my arm. He tried to hug me, but luckily, one of my tall managers walked by and I pulled away. "Hey, Grant," name changed. "Do you still need help with that cage?" Grant looked confused, but he must have seen my unease because he nodded. "Yeah, that'd be good." I looked back at the crying, grey old man and smiled nervously. We got in the elevator and I escaped upstairs. I didn't tell my manager what was happening, and they noticed how much this freaked me out. Thankfully, I didn't see this man for a few weeks. Having a week's holiday helped. A friend did say she saw him around and he was looking for me. I came back to work, and not a week later, I came to the front register to start my shift, and I saw him. Luckily, he didn't see me. I stopped and headed back to the elevators. I found my manager and told him what was going on. He told me to go downstairs to the basement and stay there until he came and got me. I don't know what happened except what I was told. Apparently, the man started yelling and saying that his granddaughter worked here, and started yelling that he needs to see me. The security and my manager tried for about 10 minutes to get him out of the store. He had with him photos, female clothing, and a bracelet. I can only assume they were from his granddaughter. He started screaming and had to be dragged out the store. From that day on, I spent most of my time in the basement, working the registers there. I left that job to move back to Adelaide soon after. I did kind of feel sorry for the man, having suffered such a loss. He was obviously not accepting their deaths. In saying that though, old grey-haired man from Target, let's never meet again. First post here. This happened yesterday at work, and decided to post it here after mulling it over a bit. Background info. I work for a company that receives donated clothes and goods that we give to those in need, mostly orphan children and low-income families. We drive 5-ton trucks around the province and pick up material from houses and businesses. We get a list at the beginning of the day with addresses, phone numbers, names, and special instructions. Story. Yesterday I was on a run in our city and had a stop in what is nicknamed the Reserve, which is essentially a 20-block radius of low-income families and is a population centre for our First Nation calls, hence the name. This area has an extremely high crime rate and is really not a good place to be if you're white. The house on my list was just on the southern edge of the reserve, located across the street from a set of train tracks in a field. What was odd about was that the list only had an address and special instructions, no name or number. This is the first time I had seen something like that in the 6 years I've been doing this. The special instructions simply stated, empty house, come inside. When I arrived at the house, I was nervous as the house looked abandoned. The front door was missing. There were several broken windows and the yard looked as though it hadn't been groomed for decades. A jungle of tall grass, weeds and trees obscuring a dilapidated building. Needless to say, I was on edge. In my experience, these kinds of houses were usually owned by drug dealers, so I assumed that whoever lived there was a drug dealer. I made a quick call to the office to make sure I had the right address, and it was confirmed. Shit. I parked the truck and made my way to the empty hole that was the front door. I knocked on the door frame, but there was no answer. So I stepped inside to see that the entire place was trashed. The place was completely bare, but it was filled with graffiti and holes in the walls. All of the light fixtures were broken, and there were puddles of water from rain the day before. I called out into the dark house and received no answer. So I walked into the next room and found a piece of paper on the floor. The paper was standard printing paper with a message printed on it. And just strange as there was no computer around and I doubt the place had any power. The message simply stated, I'm in the basement. I found a doorway to what I assumed was the basement, but it was pitch black down there, and a lot of the steps were broken. At this point, my brain was screaming at me to get out, but I decided to do my job and call out to whoever was down there. I announced my presence and who I work for, and asked if anyone was down there. There was silence for a few moments, and then I heard an older man's voice coming from the darkness saying, I'm down here. For some reason, this made the hair on the back of my neck stand up, and I decided it was time to leave. I called out and said, it's too dark down there and these steps are broken. I'm afraid I can't come down, sir. If you want, you can call our office and reschedule the appointment for another day. There was silence for a few moments, and just as I was about to repeat myself, I heard the man say, Don't worry about the steps, just come down here. At this point, I normally would have just repeated what I said, but I was in flight mode and wanted out of there now. So instead of giving them a cheerful farewell, I speed walked to the front door and was walking under the front steps when I heard a man's voice on one more time saying, Where are you going? Come back. I broke into a sprint and got into my truck as fast as possible. I put it in drive and took off, possibly breaking the land speed record in the process. I looked back at the house and half expected to see someone standing in the window like some horror cliche, but instead there was nothing. I called my boss and told him what had happened, and he said that I should never have gone inside. He told me today that a few years ago, they had 2 drivers go to the same abandoned houses, and they were robbed by some gang members. He said those guys told a very similar story, except I wasn't robbed. With this in mind, I really do wonder if I was walking into some kind of trap or if the guy was some kind of serial killer. Hell, maybe he's just a lonely man looking for some company. But I wasn't keen on finding out. I ended up putting the address on our do not pick up list, so no drives will go down there anymore. He may have been an honest man trying to make a donation, but I wasn't going to risk the lives of my co-workers to find out. Everything about the scenario felt wrong and sketchy. I'm just glad I didn't get turned into a lampshade. This story is about 3 years old, from a time when I was living alone in a somewhat sketchy area of a major US city. I was 23 at the time, and very small. I absolutely adored my studio apartment. It was located on the fourth floor of an old red brick building built in 1912, complete with rickety fire escape, an elevator with layers of old paint that had peeled off over the years, exposing a patchwork time capsule of gaudy taste. The walls were thin, the carpet blue, tacky and well worn. The doors were relatively new and cheap. They may as well have been made of plywood. But it had that great city feel about it. Located in the most populous part of the city, tall buildings and Art Deco, theatres surrounding it, illuminating nightfall with 3 standing neon signs and spotlit billboards. I felt free and alive. I lived there for 2 years. I had a few incidents in and around the building that should have been indicators I needed to break my lease, including a neighbour exposing himself to me on the fire escape one night as I was smoking a cigarette. And worse even still, when I was beating a mouse for my laptop 1 block away. Like many of the building's residents, I had seen hard times before, and moving anywhere safe from my income seemed near impossible. I was barely getting by, so I convinced myself to wait it out and everything would be okay. Until it wasn't. Normally, I'd take the train and go dancing Friday nights. This is probably the only Friday night I decided to stay in. My friend Homer was over watching a movie and another friend Justin was staying with me until he could find a room. Despite whatever random turn of events led to this night, I'm very grateful they were with me. I lived alone. My neighbours knew that fact, but I knew most of my neighbours. They were mostly struggling actors and artists, a few immigrant families and some elderly people. They took care of each other, and none of them aside from the creep who exposed himself to me were cause for concern. I should state here before I continue with my story that the creep I just mentioned was not responsible for the following events. He couldn't have been, because he was shorter than me at 5'6" and barely spoke English. At around 10 PM I roll out some blankets and yoga mats for the guys to crash on. My bed wasn't much better. A foam futon mattress topper lying on the floor. It is worth mentioning here that because my place was so tiny, the bed could only face one direction without blocking the kitchen. It is also worth mentioning here that my apartment looks out onto the street, and any lights on or off are visible from the street below. At 10 PM we hit the lights and called it a night. As I lie in bed staring at the door, trying to fall asleep, something catches my eye. Remember I mentioned the fire escape right outside my apartment door. Tenants often walked to the fire escape, much to my landlord's disgust, to smoke cigarettes, weed, or drink beer. Because of its proximity to my door and open windows, I can hear conversations on the fire escape. The usual suspects who party up there normally brought music with them. Tonight it was silent, but for a pair of feet kept walking in front of my door, their shadow exposed by the fluorescent hallway lights. Nobody's up there drinking tonight. Why is someone going back and forth in the hall? Wait, is someone pacing in front of my door? I feel a jump in my side. Do you see that? Homer whispered. I wasn't going to say anything, Justin chimed in. They were both still awake. Then to our collective horror, the feet stopped directly in front of my door. About 20 seconds later, a second pair joined them. The second man was huge. He must have been 6 feet tall, over that, because the shadow of his body eliminated the light around half my door frame. I realized he was standing in front of the side that locks. Then more whispering, this time from the other side of the door. We couldn't make out any of it, except one telling the other, shh. Then the knocking began. It was a light, almost friendly knock. The same type of knock I use when visiting a friend's house and then let them know I'm at their door. Immediately I froze. None of my neighbours ever come to my door. Only my landlord, and only during business hours. I wasn't expecting company, nor did I have the type of friends who show up unannounced. My building locks from the outside, and you need to be a resident or have a key to get in. My mind started racing. Do they know I'm home? I was usually gone at the weekends. I thought of calling the police and then remembered using my phone in the building with walls so thin you can hear your neighbour's TV programs. It wasn't a great idea. Besides, how would they even get into the building? I sure as hell wasn't opening that door. More knocking, playful this time, taunting. Homer and I sat frozen in fear as Justin walked to my kitchen and grabbed 3 knives. He handed them to each of us. My knife was maybe 4 inches long and used for cutting bread. I never felt as trapped and helpless as I did at that moment. It was because of this experience alone I later learned to use firearms. Whispers on the other side of the door and suddenly banging. Boom, boom, boom. "I know you're in there," a heavy voice hissed. "Funny face, I know you're home." My heart fell out my arse when I realized he knew my name. Then we heard the scratching. My lock jiggles. Fuck. Immediately, Homer half leaps, half stumbles to the door. With the stealth of a ninja, he locks the deadbolt and chain and silently and quickly. "They're trying to take the fucking handle off my door." And then it stopped. I looked at the boys. "Nobody goes near the fucking door," I remember saying. I have no idea what I did following that moment. I grew up around domestic violence and have a habit of blacking out certain memories or events that disturb me as a defense mechanism. Perhaps it is because of this that I fell asleep that night. When I woke up that next morning, I finally opened my door. A screw was missing from the handle. The other, thankfully, stripped beyond removal. On the floor was a pile of cigarette butts and ashes. They must have waited outside my door, second-guessing my being home, and waited until the clubs ended. Waited for me in front of my own door. I later asked the teenage boys who play outside around the building what they saw. They were troubled kids who got shaken down weekly by police for stealing bikes, tagging dumpsters, that kind of thing. But they were harmless and quite friendly with me. And they told me that 2 to 3 large black males were staring at my window and trying to jump or lift each other up the first level and onto the fire escape. That's how they got in. To this day, I have no idea who they were or what they wanted. My landlord was too cheap to ever install security cams. I get chills down my spine when I think about how they could have possibly known my name. So, would-be robbers, rapists who tried breaking in on me and waiting outside my door. Let's not meet. Next time, I'll have a gun. Thanks for watching. If you liked the video, don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe. Provide me with any recommendations, and thank you for listening to abnormal stories that happen in an abnormal world.